one of the largest stations in New England, right out of Boston. And the name of the show was Yankee Yarns, the talk show host of Alton Hall Blackington. And my dad listened to the show, for a number of years, but this is the first time he ever heard this particular subject. And the topic was all about these strange stone ruins in southern New Hampshire. And what really surprised my dad about the show is the site was located in North Salem, New Hampshire, and he lived in the town of Derry, and Derry is the town next to North Salem. So he lived about 6 or 7 miles away from the site pretty much his whole life and had never, ever heard of this site. Coincidentally, a few days later at a barber shop, he was waiting to have his hair done in the same town of Derry, New Hampshire. And while he was waiting, he picked up a magazine. He opened it up and he started thumbing through it. And he got to an article that looked kind of interesting. And as he looked at it a little closer, he realized that what the article was about was the same site they had heard earlier that week, but it had pictures. And so it kind of blew him away. It's like, wow, twice in a week about this pretty interesting, very strange site. He then asked the barber, hey, can I keep this or borrow it, the magazine? And the barber goes, well, how old is that? He goes, well, let's see. It's 1952. It's 3 years old. It's been sitting here for a while, apparently. And he goes, just take it home with you. And that weekend at my aunt and uncle's in the same town, about 10 people get together on Saturday nights. It was pretty traditional for our family. They would play cards, have some beers, talk, socialize. And at one point during the card game, my dad had the magazine with him. So he just took it out. He showed it to everybody at the table playing cards. Nobody, knew what the place was, just like my dad, until I got to my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister and her brother-in-law. And when they looked at it, they were quite surprised, and they remembered, and they said, we were there 20 years ago in the 1930s. We used to go there on our bicycles while they were dating, and they would ride roughly 7 miles down there, and they would picnic up on the site. And at that time, the site was not open to the public. There were no signs, no visitor center, and you just had to know where the place was, I guess, So the next question my dad asked is, can you find the place? And they said, well, it's been 2 decades. We can give it a try, but it's been a long time. That Sunday, the four of them took off in a car. They went down the road and drove around North Salem for a little while trying to find this place. And eventually they saw a road that looked somewhat familiar to them. They took a chance, parked the car on the main road there, and then they walked up the hill about a half a mile. And when they got to the top, they were pleasantly surprised they found the right place. And there were all these ruins right in front of them. So my dad, the curiosity got the better of him. He decided to try to climb under a 6-foot fence with barbed wire on top. And the fence is still there today. It was actually put up in 1937. So he climbed under it into the ruins, disappeared for quite a while because there were a lot of brush and trees. You couldn't really see him walking around in there. And once he came back out, he said, this is just simply amazing. And he also mentioned something about maybe getting involved with research because he was really interested in that kind of thing. And he mentioned, well, maybe we could purchase it, open it to the public, and open it up as a museum, and because my mom's response was something about you got rocks in your head, So she wasn't too keen on the idea, I guess, because I was a baby, I had a sister on the way, and they had just built a house, and my dad had a new job at AT&T Bell Labs as an engineer. He had been in the Coast Guard prior to that for a few years. So, and he was going to college too at the same time. So it's like, he was night school, college. So she thought he was nuts to pick up something else,
And you kind of have to be in your own right to be self-employed to begin with, Dennis. There is a certain type of mania that you have to you in order to do that, much less to take on a project the scope of this. And once your dad purchased it, how long before things started getting uncovered, before y'all started really discovering the scope of because you're still uncovering the scope of the project?
Yeah, it never stops. Actually, that's a good question, Chris, but the work had actually started in 1937 by a gentleman from Hartford, Connecticut, an insurance millionaire, William B. Goodwin. And he was an antiquarian. He had lived on the West Coast. He had lived in Kansas City, as a matter of fact, at a bank. He worked at a bank, and then he got involved with insurance. His family were basically Edgar and Phoenix, I think, insurance companies. And when he got out to Seattle for a while, they put him in charge of an office there. And he did so well setting up the office that they moved him to San Francisco. And he had married his wife from Seattle just before he left there. He was involved with the University of Washington, the football team, the athletic club, and he actually panned for gold up in the Yukon too for a while. But he was also managing that office. They liked what he did. He went to San Francisco. He was there for a while, and he left because they moved him to Columbus, Ohio. And when he left, the earthquake in 1906 happened. So I think he was very fortunate getting out of it because he was in insurance, But interesting enough, in Ohio, he would go out and map some of the mounds. Ohio at one time, about 10,000 ancient mounds. About 90% of them are gone today due to some natural causes as well as development, highways, buildings. And he would go out and map the locations, and he did that for about 15 years. So I believe his work is still in the archives of Ohio, and that got him fascinated in the ancient past. And he moved back to Hartford, retired in 1931, was involved with a museum called the Wadsworth Antiquarium, an early American antique collection that he put together actually much earlier than that. He did it back around 1900, and he did it with his cousin, J.P. Morgan. So the Morgans and the Goodwins were one family. But Morgan died in 1913, so he had nothing to do with our site. By 1936, he was getting involved with stone structures elsewhere in Massachusetts, and he was aware of some in a couple other states, but he eventually learned about our site. And when he came up in 1936 and saw our site, he was like my dad. He was completely blown away by the site. And he ended up purchasing the site in 1937, and that's when the archaeology began. And he worked on the site for a number of years. And he actually got involved with a couple other New England sites after our site. Our site was first, and he worked up in Raymond, New Hampshire. He worked in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, where the Boston Marathon starts. There's actually structures there, too. And the Upton Chamber in Upton, Massachusetts, and a couple other structures. And he knew of about 16 different structures by the mid-1940s. And he wrote several books, The Truth About Leif Erikson, The Spanish Gold, because he used to go to Jamaica all the time. And when he vacationed in Jamaica, he was looking where Columbus landed on. He had 4 voyages, and he was looking for Columbus's, I forget if it was the first landing or whatever it was, and he turns out he was correct. And then he wrote a third book, and in 1946, he wrote about our site and some of the other 15 sites, and the book was called The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England. So this is his 4th book, and by that time he was very sick. He died in 1950, so when they're putting the book together, he was quite ill, so he had some help on that last book. But it talks about our site and, again, about 15 other sites.
This is where the connection of quite a few of these to what are known as beehive structures, specifically in Ireland and things like that, are tied to, and what they believe they may be. Now, what's curious is that there are parts of the complex that are a complex that you can go into. Like there is a part just below and back here, you can see this little raised part with the ground on top, and you can traverse this area, but there are only a few spots like that within the complex. There are numerous nooks, crannies, things like that you can climb into, much like this, but they aren't connected to anything larger. It's interesting. It's almost like they're used for sighting or something along those lines, which there are numerous and tons of archeo-astronomic alignments to this location. So let's start getting into that a little bit. Here's an actual LiDAR of the property, folks. There are the actual alignments, at least as of a few years ago. This was given to me whenever you first came on the show about 3.5 years ago. Dennis. So
that's correct, Chris. Yeah, that goes back. The gentleman came in from Connecticut. He bought a LiDAR. He's a landscape architect with a master's degree, but he got into LiDAR just a few years ago, and he bought a $50,000 handheld unit. And he was doing some work. He's out of Connecticut, in Suffield, Connecticut. Wonderful guy. So he decided to do this as kind of a second career, I guess, paralleling his landscape architectural work. And so he asked us if we wouldn't mind if he came up and did some scans. And what you see there is the result of him coming up several times, carrying around that LiDAR on his back like a backpack and walking around the site. And he had some back issues too, you know, which has been corrected recently. Thankfully, he had a little operation. But anyway, he scanned about, that's 16 acres there. We have 110 acres. That hasn't been scanned, and that's covered with structures, walls, serpentine walls, and other features. But that right there took 600 hours of computer processing to do all the data. That's pretty intense, you know. And he's done sites from here all the way down to Pennsylvania, and actually was in Belize with a friend, Jared Murphy. I got them connected up, and they're going to be working on some Mayan ruins in a great big 7,000 acre development, and they want to preserve the ruins, and he's going to be doing more. And I'm hoping to join him down there because I'd love to help him and spend a couple of days down there where it's warm. He's already been down there once to kind of do a little reconnaissance on the property. But that there is 50, that's about 57 alignments for the sun, the moon, and stars, all kind of superimposed over the red of the walls. That's the some of the wall patterns on that 15-acre pot, you know, in the middle of its domain site that you were showing different structures. So, yeah, someday in the future, and because the technology keeps improving and everything, we might do the other 90 acres. We really should at some point. But he is out there doing other sites all across the Northeast and elsewhere. Yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty cool technology.
And there are numerous standing stones like this one right here on the property. This is not the main alignment stone, but this is one of them that the sun rises over, the moon rises over. Even whenever I was there on property all of a few months ago, there was an alignment that I showed you for the moon that it had just passed within like 24, 48 hours. It's remarkable to see the number of alignments that are there where it's like it is. It's not coincidence, you know,
right?
And it's
exactly. Good point, Chris.
It's not random happenstance that these stones are carved the way that they are, or that they are standing the way that they are in the location that they are.
That there's a winter solstice, and that's pretty typical of some of the alignment marker stones, kind of arrowhead shaped. And they were part of the bedrock at one time, like most of the slab work, removed from the bedrock and then shaped using a technique called percussion flaking, you know, stone against stone. And if you look at the stones very carefully, you can see a little dimpling on it where they were actually shaping, or what we call dressing the stone. But it's like a gigantic arrowhead. And some of these actually go up to about 8 feet in length. That are aligned with the sun, moon, or stars. You know, they're pretty significant. Oh, excuse me, because my dog's
That's okay. No worries. No worries.
It's live.
Dogs are dogs.
I apologize for that. But that alignment, dog. Sky. Sorry, Chris, I apologize.
It's okay,
man.
I
locked away in a room upstairs with my wife, but she must have let him out. If I can get him quieted down there for a second.
Well,
a little embarrassing moment there. Sorry.
That's perfectly okay. That's perfectly okay. Once again, if he would be a bad dog if he didn't bark at things that were strange to him. You know.
Well, he does bark at. She does bark at a lot of things that aren't out there. I don't know what. Maybe there's ghosts out there or some other paranormal stuff going on. I think, but that's a nightly occurrence, by the way, and that's why I put him in a room with my wife, and I think she let him out of the room. But that alignment, Chris, actually. I was just talking to the gentleman today. He's in France. He was with us from 63 to 68 through high school and into college. He graduated as a nuclear engineer. But he opened up that alignment starting in 1965. He did it by hand, and then he borrowed a neighbor's chainsaw. He just told me recently. He goes to France for the whole winter season. His wife's from there. And then he comes back to an island up in Maine, your old stomping grounds. He's on an island there for the rest of the year, you know, during the summer and fall. And he visits us because his kids actually live close to here. But he opened that up, 1965, 70 took the first photographs. And I did not know that until about 3 years ago. Because, Dennis, I got 67 photographs.
Wow.
Because I know in 1970, I saw it for the first time with my dad, a neighbor. We drove down in the winter with over a foot of brand new snow. We met him at his folks' house. He had just come up from Newport News, Virginia. He was working on the Nimitz. He's one of the nuclear engineers that put the 2 reactors on that ship.
Oh,
because
wow.
If anybody's follows the UFO thing that listens to you, the David Fravor, the Tic Tac UFOs, that was with the Nimitz and the Princeton. And so I told him that. He got a kick out of that, too, because he was one of the guys that put the 2 he goes, every 26 years, they have to refuel that ship, and it's still out there sailing today,
Yeah.
But we met him at his folks. We walked up through the woods. He had built a wooden snowmobile, believe it, out of pods. He was so talented. He built, as a kid, all pad wheel boats. He did all these crazy things, which actually took a lot of talent to do. It's kind of cool. And we followed him up, and then we saw the sunset for the very first time. But he had actually taken pictures 3 years before that, and he just sent me the photographs, I think, 2 years ago. And they were faded Polaroid, I think, pictures of the very first sunset. And that's where it all began, back in 1965, clearing it. And so almost 60 years of astronomical work on the site.
And some of these stones, Dennis, once again, like you were saying, 8 feet, like that is a massive stone standing there. To erect that, to keep that erect, to put it into the ground, to be that way is an undertaking. Even by modern standard, that's a day's worth of work, with modern tools. And when you start looking at some of the other stonework at the location, specifically the serpentine walls, things like that, where it's like, it's not like a lot of the stone walls that are there in New England. New England is known for, if you go walking around, you'll find remnants of stone walls that were markers of property lines, things like that. People do not survey or mark things in a S-type manner, typically. That's not normally how property is divided, not how it's really thought of. It's just wild that these S-shaped walls are there, and that even the head of one is serpentine shaped and has stones in the back that reflect light certain points of the year.
They are pretty cool, and those are all known since 2016. We started discovering the first windows. You showed one a little bit earlier, and the serpentine walls. We had no idea they existed, except they've always been there. We've walked by them, and there's another actually interesting window. It has little stone cobbles. They're all loose. I did not pull them up, but I put my finger on it to see if they're loose, because they're not really supporting that lintel stone on top. Yeah. We have 2 like that. So that pattern repeats, but we have one like that. We call them stone shutters. And this double window right there, we have a number of those. And we have some with 4 windows adjacent to each other. And then we have some with Venetian-type blinds or shutters. So that one right there is my first window I found. And you can't see it in the frame, but there's 2 more little windows to the left and 1 more to the right. And that one right there looks similar. But if you look at that one with a lintel, underneath you see little flat stones. They're all loose under there. I call that the Venetian blind shutter. And a lot of these have removable stone shutters for some reason. And that one was actually found when, and there's a stone actually put into that same one that you looked at prior. That stone right there actually is standing out of the frame to the right. And our assistant archaeologist, he's a stonemason, went to the University of Boulder for his degree. And he's been involved with archaeology for 30 years and his work for almost 40. But he walked by there on the day that the History Channel was filming Ancient Aliens on our site. And as the cameraman came back down, he had everything packed away. We were walking him back. And my archaeologist happened to be that day. And as we were walking by that, it's just kind of, walking with the film, with the cameraman. My guy said, "Hey, that looks like another window," and it had all those little Venetian blinds in it. So unfortunately, the History Channel guy didn't have his equipment out. We could have done actually right on the spot discovery. Wow. That's an illumination right there. That was found in 2020, and it's a 1-hour illumination. We'll be watching that on the spring equinox. The shadow itself looks kind of interesting. It also frames the top of that quartzite white stone. That's inside the watch house.
Yeah.
And the watch house is an interesting structure. There you go, a little bit further back. You can see my shadow. You can see that quartzite stone inside the chamber. That's been talked about going back for years. Even Hans Holzer's book, which I have, 1992 it came out. They're asking, what is that stone in there? Does it have a purpose?
Yeah.
And we didn't know for 30 more years what the purpose was. We think it's an illumination. And it starts at 7:30 in the morning on the equinox. And it goes to 8 o'clock where there's a different shadow. It's on the top of the stone. And then it looks like a hand at the end of it, like a morphing into a hand, light and shadow event. That chamber right there, we believe, the boulder on the right is a head of a serpent that wraps around the entire 15 acres that you showed on the LiDAR, comes back, does a hump, just like a serpent's body, 90-degree twist with the tail pointing at us, And it has humps behind there, too, to the right that you can't see because of the boulders and noise, an undulation, just like a serpent. So that's 2,550 feet long. It could be the biggest serpent effigy anywhere, unless somebody has one that's bigger. We haven't heard that yet. Yeah. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio is earthed on a stone platform. We were there last summer. And that's 1,350 feet, about half as long as that one. So we might have one of the biggest serpent effigies anyway, perhaps, that's our best knowledge at the moment.
It is huge. It's a large construction when you're there, when you see it. And this is the opposite end. Way down here is where you're talking about where the head is.
That's actually the S-shaped one, Chris. And that one there is actually shaped like the other. And actually towards the right of the picture, down front towards the right, you see a stone there. That is actually a triangular stone that we think is the head. Then the body disappears to the left, to the right, back to the left, ends with a little boulder, 140 feet, almost 140 feet away. So that's about 140-foot S-shaped serpent wall. And that's opposite from the watch house. That's near the astronomical sunset markers,
Well, and
that particular.
The quartzite that you're talking about is interesting. I've got a piece right here, and you can see all of the little granules in there that would reflect light very, very well. There's tons of it, and it's all over the place. But specifically, they're where what is called the altar stone, supposedly by many people, which once again is one of the many reasons that people don't really know what this location was used for. There are all kind of hypotheses out there. It is interesting how this grassed area right here behind it, if you look directly underneath the altar, there is a tiny little window that accesses this chamber. And it very reminiscent to me of, ancient Greece, things like that, where they had priests under the altars with megaphones, things like that, performing the parts of the voices of gods, stuff like that. So, but have y'all ever had that area tested biologically, DNA, anything like that?
Well, we have had DNA this last year. It was on some bones that was found in the middle of the site back in 1937. We had 2 of the bones out of the 3 sent up to Thunder Bay, Canada, to a laboratory, and it's part of a university up there called Lakefront. It had been used by one of my friends from the West Coast on the Paracas skulls, and so he kind of helped us on that. And we sent them up through customs, 2 samples. We kept one in safekeeping back here in case the post office should lose them or something happen. It took a couple months to get the results back, and it came back that they checked they were related bones. They were found kind of in what we call the plaza area of the main site. And it's very, very little soil on the site. So even the first photographs in 1920, all you see is bedrock, debris, brush, but not much accumulation of dirt. So why were these bones there? If they were buried, they weren't buried in like a couple inches of soil. And were they human or not human? And in 1968, let's see, that would have been see, 30 years after they were found, they were brought to the Smithsonian, and a woman, and that's the area you were just looking at where the bones were found, actually, just to the right of that area in that previous shot there. And they were looked at by the Smithsonian by a professor, Lucille St. Hoyen, I think her name was, and she looked at him, she studied him, she said, she mentioned some of the density of the bones and also the hardness of the bones and their appearance. And she said, I think these are human, but they didn't have DNA back then. So eventually the bones were sent back to us. They made it into the newspapers, possible human bones, which raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of curiosity. And they made it into some of the journals like the New England Antiquities Research Association. And there are various stories about it. And then it kind of rested for 55 years. So we sent them up there. The results came back after 2 months that they were related bones, the same person. And also they were compared to 39,354 different humans, I think, and what it turned out to be is Greek ancestry. We're like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Well, we don't know historically any names that were Greek, and yet this was a Greek person. And it's so obviously somebody Greek was up there. We have a lot of records going back to 1734 with different people on the site, but that's nothing. So it's kind of curious, and then how old the bones were. So I called up the laboratory we've been using since 1967 for our carbon dating. So in Massachusetts, I talked to the son of Dr. Harold Kruger, and he died in 1993. He's the one my dad worked with through the 60s, 70s, and 80s on carbon datings. And the son has taken over the whole laboratory. And I mentioned what we had, and I said, I don't know, these bones have been out of the ground for like almost 80 years. And they've been exposed to the elements. He goes, actually, that's not a problem. And if you got DNA out of these, collagen and protein and so forth, he goes, I think we can carbon date them. So he sent one bone out to be carbon dated. We kept the other two that were remaining. And it took us 4 months to get the results back because he had to clean them, prepare them. He sent them to the University of Arizona in Tucson. And finally they came back, and it came out, they were fairly recent, anywhere from about 170 years old going back to about 1690.
Oh, wow.
So they had like a range. So that brought up a lot of questions. Why is somebody on the site dying and being left there to decompose when there's really no dirt up there, I mean, who does that? So it added to the mystery of the site. But now we know they're not ancient and they're not animal, but they're human and apparently of Greek ancestry. So it's just another puzzle of the place. But we have been doing DNA. The table, actually, when they first found it, was buried up to the bottom. So they thought it was sitting on the ground. And when they dug down, they found the 4 legs, which was quite surprising. It's like a table with legs. And it's 9,000 pounds. It's almost 6 feet by
massive.
9.
It's massive.
And it has that tube you mentioned, and that goes 6 feet through the ground to the oracle chamber. And when you're standing in the oracle chamber where it comes out, there's a stone step. They actually left the bedrock there. They quarried around there. And they left a step, so somebody around 5.5 feet, maybe a little bit taller. I'm just almost 5'8", just a little bit under that. And I can stand it comfortably, and I can yell through that tube, and the voice comes out underneath the table.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the curtain. If people outside hearing this voice might think it's a spirit or something like that speaking to them, during a ceremony. And that table does have a deep groove. We always called it a rectangular groove on the table, and the table is bell-shaped. But that groove, we measured it, I measured it in 2016, actually carefully, because somebody mentioned it was rectangular. We went up and it's actually a trapezoid shape. It's 9 inches shorter at the top than the groove is at the bottom, And where to the right of that table is a little runnel. And I think I took you up to the table on your visit.
Yes.
There's a little runnel there. Yeah, it's on the table surface. It's a little runoff. So any fluid that gets into that groove will actually run off the table to the right. And below there, the bedrock was actually removed, and there's actually like a cutout where either that fluid could actually go into that cutout. It also could hold like a clay vase or something, perhaps, to collect the fluid. It's been suggested that the table may have been a limestone for making soap, but they're usually something you can pick up. They're usually a couple 100 pounds, maybe 36 inches across to maybe 40-something. Maybe an inch thick in a very, very shallow circular groove. That's the only similarities. But this stone is about 9,000 pounds, and also maybe a cider press. But a cider press like Sturbridge, Mass, is made out of wood and steel bands, and it has a wooden screw.
You would have tons of spillage if you were to use that as a cider press.
My friend from Texas, you're from Texas, and she was a rodeo star, the one we were talking about earlier, and she has horses. She had horses. Her parents have horses. I said, could you get a horse down there with a wagon to bring in apples if you're going to crush them? She goes, no, you can't get in there. A person can walk in there. The table's in the way. The oracle chamber's in the way. There's a standing stone, there's one in the background you can see, so you're not going to come in from that direction. There's a chamber to the back right. That wall on the right you can see is about a 6 foot tall ramp area right along that whole thing.
Yeah.
And what you can't see towards you is another big standing stone and a vestibule.
Yeah, there's another one of these right back on the back side right here.
Yeah,
where you walk in.
You can't get in there.
Now, what it could be, and I've hypothesized this with you on the show before, is a dressing table.
Right.
Like
that's
what,
a possibility too,
like
right?
what you use in hunting, where it's basically like a big old butcher block, that's made to run off the blood and everything else that, yes, you can catch and still use in byproduct. You can still use for making sausage. You can use for all kinds of things. Yes, you could use for ceremony as well. But it highly explains some of the structures that are on property that are just kind of there. Once again, not really connected to much, not really connected to anything. However, if you're talking about using that as, somewhere to put meat to dry, to create a convection of air inside of there, something like that, to cure meat rapidly, something like that, sure. But it's interesting because it's not like there are a lot of spoils. Typically, like that's the golden zone for an archaeologist is, hey, let's find the trash heap. Let's find out what the people were eating. There is evidence of like maybe about 3/4 of a wigwam down near the parking area, and not a whole lot of evidence of actual habitation of the location, correct?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the site archaeologically is fairly clean. If you're going to be working in an area where people live, you're going to find the middens, their trash, their dumps, whatever doesn't decompose, But like megalithic sites in Europe, it's very frustrating for archaeologists because when they get into Stonehenge and other sites, there's not that much there. There might be some remains, but what we found on our site are hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers. These were tools probably used in the construction of the site left over, and we found quite a few of those. So Stone Age tools found in the debris of the site.
What about flake fields, like fields of percussive flake or chert? Have y'all found that from the actual stone work being done there on location?
Well, some of the stones came from the immediate area. Of course, you can see the bedrock. So any little flakes, if they're still there, they got washed, they got moved around, picked up. But the first stone that was found outside what we call the main site, where that chain link fence covers about 1 acre. It was 42 years ago, a woman named Mary, and she went out for a picnic lunch, sat on the side of a kind of a stone that was slanted upward, like a piece of bedrock, and she looked at it closely because she had been informed by late David Stewart Smith, who had been with us since 1978. And David said, look for any stones that may have a serrated edge that might indicate percussion flaking, little dimpling. Also, if the stone's been propped up, maybe off the bedrock, that might be an indication they're trying to get the stone detached from the bedrock, raise it, shape it, address it, and then the next step, of course, would be moving it wherever they wanted to do construction.
Sure.
Well, she was sitting there having a lunch. She looked down by her legs, and sure enough, there's dimpling right there. The stone's about 10 feet long, maybe about 5 feet wide, and about 7 or 8 inches thick, and it's propped up where she's sitting. She goes, this thing's at an angle. She looked under it. I think she saw the propping stone. So the next year, in 1983, David Stewart Smith and the state archaeologist, Dr. Thierry Hume, who's still alive today but retired, he was a lithic specialist. He knew how ancient people made stone tools, the knapping, the percussion flaking, the pressure flaking. He was an expert in that. And he had already been doing a couple projects on our site, which is kind of strange because mainstream is pretty much try to stay away from the site. It shouldn't really exist. But he got involved with it, which is great. He stuck his neck out, and he came to the conclusion that these big slabs, like the table you're looking at, the slab to the right, that's one of the stones you can't get by with a horse and wagon, you know, right on the right side there. The roof slabs, the wall slabs, the astronomical alignments, and other slabs that have been found all over the 110 acres now. We have about 34 of them in situ in their original position when they were propped up. These were actually prepared slabs of bedrock by man. And he said, this is like creating a 10.5 or multi-ton arrowhead. This is Stone Age technology. This is not historical, colonial, post-colonial type of work. So these people were fashioning these big slabs, almost like they're a gigantic arrowhead, spear point, stone knife, that kind of thing, or even a stone shovel. You know, we have one of those on display in our museum too. So we have stone tools. We have the stone masonry, Stone Age masonry type techniques that were used on the site. Not, you know, 1900s, 1800s type work, you know. I think the site's ceremonial. I think it's like many of the megalithic sites in Europe, there are about 50,000. Skara Brae was a living place. That's an exception up in Scotland. And then there's a place called Stanley Dale, and that was another living place. The reason they did that, they didn't have much wood in those areas, so they used stone. For the most part, they lived in hide or wood or some perishable material, more comfortable, you know, temporary things that would last maybe a decade before they rotted or two. And what you got to find is something that doesn't decompose in the ground, you know, stone, ceramics, that kind of thing, maybe some bones. But at our site, you know, anything that's going to decompose, the soil's very acidic. We have wet climate. So bones, were like, when we looked at those bones, we're like, wow, you know, how old are these bones? But usually they dissolve in about 200 or 300 years. And because wood rots pretty quickly, if you have a wooden tool, that's going to go away in a decade or two. It's going to be gone, you know.
Well, and now, granted, I was trying to find the image of it. I'll find it as you talk about it, guaranteed. But there was, speaking of things engraved, that kind of stuff. There you have an interesting number of artifacts there on site. And you've got them displayed as you walk in there in the gift shop. There's a little corner with all kinds of things, but one of the stones specifically has carvings from another language, two other languages on it. Which, you know, we've got about another 15 minutes with you. Let's spend about 5 or 6 minutes talking about that before we get into upcoming events at the location, because I think it really goes to speak to some of the age possibly of the site, and you know, oddly even sources of construction, things like that. So let's get into the strange writing stone that was found that you have there in the museum.
Well, the first carving actually was found by Malcolm Pearson, and he's a gentleman that my dad ended up buying the site from, and he leased it for several years, starting in 58 to 65. But going back to the 30s, Malcolm was there and showed Mr. Goodwin the site in 1936, and then the work began in 37. And Malcolm happened to spot this carving inside the oracle chamber. And it was towards the east side of the oracle chamber. It's shaped like the letter Y. It runs north and south, east and west. And on the eastern part, there was a window down there that's now an exit. It was actually a window. And right across from that, there was a carving. And he's the one that, at least in historical, we know, maybe somebody back years before that saw it, never reported it. But it was a running deer carving, they called it. But actually, it looks more like an ibex. It doesn't have a deer antler, but it does look like an animal with an antler on it. And that's the first one. And then in the 60s, other stones with markings were found in a structure called the Chamber in Ruins. In fact, 3 different stones came out of their triangular shape. They were put on display in our museum as unknown markings for a number of years. And that changed in 1975 when Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University first visited the site. And he took one of the stones right back to Arlington, Mass, where he lived. And I had a translation fairly quickly. In his work, his opinion was that it was Iberian Punic or Phoenician that was found in Spain and Portugal, and that it was a dedication to Baal on behalf of the Canaanites. And so that was interesting. You know, it's like, well, we got Phoenician. And they came back many, many more times after that. And that was June of 1975. And I saw them the very first day walking up with a couple of our archaeologists up to the site. Well, this looks interesting, you know, a professor from Harvard University. Well, he also identified other markings later. And you mentioned 2 possible inscriptions, actually 3. So Phoenician,
yeah,
and then Ogham or Ogham, which is Irish, you know, but is also found in other places in the British Isles. It's in Scotland, Wales, and he says it's in Spain and Portugal and other places. But so Ogham, that's Celtic Ogham by the ancient Celts, and then Libyan. And he also mentioned that all these people were in Spain and Portugal. It was a kind of a melting pot on the Iberian Peninsula, and he felt they were multilingual. And then they eventually launched, like Columbus did, from Spain, possibly heading over to the New World, and then bring in these languages. But our site's not the only one. These languages that I just mentioned, these inscriptions, actually go all the way up to the West Coast. They go down to South America. The Parahiba stone was found in 1872 in Brazil, and by some slaves. And they tried to bring it to people's attention, but nobody really paid attention to much, much later. And I believe that was also a Celtic, but in a Phoenician language, talking about ships coming in with cargo. And that's just another example, but that's in Brazil. So it's not just our site. But Vermont, by the way, has the most inscriptions in the chambers up there of anywhere in the Northeast. And I was just reading it again in a book, and it reminded me, it said also anywhere in Europe. So Vermont is loaded with inscriptions.
Wow.
So it's not just, so if you have a hoaxer up at our site, these archaeologists like to say everything's either a coincidence, particularly with the astronomical alignments, like you mentioned earlier, or hoax, fake, fraud, misinterpretation. It's, you know, we don't, with all the data, all the evidence we have, all the different types of data you can do, I don't think that's the answer.
If you had 2 or 3 cursory alignments amongst, because, you know, of course, to trace these things back, you got to go back to whenever you think they may have been built, you know. Whether or not they align at that point is what's important.
Right.
You know, and I mean, it's cool if they align now, but if they didn't align or weren't close to aligning then you have a little bit of a problem. And that's the thing all of these alignments that you guys have all track back, every one of them.
That's a good point, Chris, because we did the survey from 73 to 77 after we started the project in 65 with the astronomical research. And we hired a professional surveyor. And it took time because we paid as he went. So it took him from 73 to 77, sent that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Mass. We got the results back, and they said, well, if these were used as astronomical alignments, it would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 200 years due to the obliquity. The Earth's tilt is a 41,000-year cycle, and it's 23.5 degrees approximately today, but it very slowly changes. That agreed with one of our carbon datings. The oldest one on the main site from 1971 was about 4,000 years old. So 7 years later, in 78, we're getting results that the alignments agree with the carbon dating. So another coincidence? I think it's more than that. I think it shows the antiquity of the site. We have done 16 carbon datings on the site. We've got 2 OSL dates that worked, and they were pre-Patty, pre-colonial. 2 rock samples didn't test, but that was true of other sites in Connecticut. I don't know. They're having problems with rock sample testing. So we have 2 different types of dating, geological dating, actually, the OSL, because of carbon dating, and then we have the astronomical alignment showing the same time period, you know, going back to about 4,000 years. I don't think that's a coincidence, you know. I think that's because that's how old the site is.
Well, and that's just it. It is when you start looking at even the fact that when colonial Americans moved into the location and asked the natives, what's this thing that y'all built? Why'd y'all build that? That I don't know. That's been there for generations. We didn't build that thing. It's remarkable and interesting to look at it, to consider what its possible use was, what it was for, because once again, the local natives didn't really build structure in such a way. You know, it's not like that is how they lived. They didn't build rock structure to live or anything like that. So
nothing we know of. You're right. Yeah, if they did, it was so long ago that it's been
that
forgotten,
it's
but we've been told
forgotten
Native
in their
Americans would build out
knowledge.
of. They used them for tools, utensils, weapons,
Yeah.
and then ceramics, but they didn't build stone chambers. You know, like the Flintstones kind of thing. You know, but
Yeah.
nothing like that. You know.
Well, and that's just it. And once again, many of the chambers that are there are anomalously small. Many of them are just little like brick wall nooks that go down almost, and you know, I think very much probably used for observation, because once again, the site itself, whenever you go and look at it, these are not old growth trees.
Right.
You know,
right.
it's not like these are trees that are like 200 years old.
We think the hilltop from a shovel test pit study that started in '92 by our archaeologist, who's the president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, and she had a husband of doctor of geology at Tufts University, and he was helpful too. So we actually had her husband was a doctor of that. He knows about soil and, you know, the buildup of soil and bedrock. Well, and the idea was, after she did quite a few of these shovel test pits across the hilltop, mapping both geological and archaeological data, that the hilltop was probably 75% bare 4,000 years ago. And then wind-blown particles and vegetation decay in about 125 years on a level. Now, we got a hill, so things wash down it, so it's a slower process. But if it was a level area, it'd be about an inch every 125 years for soil to build up. It was an open hill, I think, 4,000 years ago, with some trees maybe and brush, but not like it was, you know, as it is today. You know?
Yeah, precisely. So you would have had a much more open view of the landscape. You would have had a much more open view of these alignments. They would not have been obscured the way that
Chris,
they are
remember
now.
the drainage system on the main site? There's underground tunnels and there's channels in the bedrock. And again, with dirt, the dirt would absorb the water, but when you have exposed bedrock with rain or snow, when it melts, would just puddle up all over the place. Well, they created an entire network of drains to deal with water, you know? Yeah. And that's because you were sitting on bedrock at the time. And, you know, Chris, if you're taking those big slabs, and I mentioned 34, some of them are 1,000 feet from the main site, so work in progress, I think, was going on, and they stopped. If you try to move those big slabs, even on log rollers, on dirt, the rock, they get bogged down, they'll sink into the dirt. If you have bedrock, those log rollers will roll over the bedrock, you know, without the friction and without all that dirt and debris.
Absolutely.
So I think we're going back to that time when it makes a lot of sense to us, you know, it's just logical sense, but then we have some proof of that too, you know?
Yeah, most
from all
definitely.
Shovel test been there.
Well, and, you know, you guys, and once again, one of the most amazing sites that I have been to in North America, absolutely phenomenal. The mystery continues, and you guys continue to have research done. You guys continue to give people educational tours, all kinds of things. As a matter of fact, you have an amazing event coming up with not just yourself, but two other guests that we have had here on the show, Ronnie LeBlanc, as well as Haley Ramsey, and the amazing Scott Walter. They are all going to be there on March 23rd. A fantastic Oak Island mystery day of talks, things like that, a stargazing event at night. You guys put on all kinds of events. Let's get into a few of those. We have you for about another 3 minutes, so let everybody know about the upcoming events and what they can do to be involved and come there and check them out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we have a Valentine's event tomorrow night, 5:30 to 7, for romantic couples to come up. There'll be a walking tour with our guide, James. He's doing a wonderful job. Then we'll have the event that you just showed. It's going to be an all-day event at the Hill, starting with sunrise right through the evening with Scott, Haley, myself, and Ronnie. And there's another gentleman that joined up, too. He's a New England paranormal gentleman. He's on another banner, too. His name is Chris Sanders. He's going to join us, too. So it's going to be cool. Then we have the equinox. And the equinox will consist of celebrations, drumming, and again, a couple days later, we'll be doing the event with Ronnie and all of them. And then we're coming up on drumming circles. And we have some Reiki and some yoga things coming up on top of the hill, too, for the summer. They're already been scheduled. And then we get into the summer solstice, which is usually one of our big events, too. So right through the year, we'll be doing all these type of activities up there. And I think in the fall, we'll be doing ghost hunts. But that will be in October, I think. So that's something we'll be looking at, too.
Interesting. Well, Dennis, thank you so much, as always, for your time. It is more than a pleasure to talk with you. And it is always great to further explore this just amazing site that is quite literally in the backyard of people. I know people that almost every time I talk to somebody from New England and mention your site, somebody goes, "What? Are you serious? Like, I pass by there all the time." It's like, yeah, you like if you didn't know it was there. So yeah, thank you so much for the time. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. I'll be sending links, all that kind of stuff. Let everybody know where they can go to find out more about America's Stonehenge, where they can go to get involved, where they can go to donate, where they can go to get tickets, all that kind of good stuff, Dennis.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, our website is stonehengeusa.com. When they go to our website, there's a phone number, there's email. We also have an 11-minute video we show in our theater, but you can watch it online without ever coming. The other cool thing on there is a free app download. If you download that mobile app, you can do a complete virtual tour from your couch. But if you're at our site, when you're walking around, it will talk to you. There's pictures of text and the features you're looking at. It's a really nice way to tour. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We've done over 100 TikTok mini or short videos. And we're on Instagram, so we're kind of easy to find, and we're open every day but Christmas and Thanksgiving and the occasional New England blizzard, which I think, Chris, you're probably somewhat familiar with, being from Maine. But we have those occasionally, But yeah, we're very, we're only 40 miles from Boston, only about 15 miles from the Manchester, New Hampshire airport, which is a great airport too. And we're at Route 93, the main road that comes, a main highway that goes right out of Massachusetts, right out of Boston, right up into New Hampshire, into the White Mountains. So you can find us pretty easily. So we hope to see everybody.
Absolutely. Well, Dennis, once again, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Take care. I'll be in touch with links, all of that kind of good stuff, my friend.
Have a good night, Chris.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Take
Have
care.
a nice
You
weekend.
bet.
Thank you.
All right. While you are online checking out everything from America's Stonehenge, folks, over at stonehengeusa.com, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com is where you can follow us. That is where you can like, follow, subscribe, share, comment. That is where you can keep track of all the episodes. That's where you can find our events page, which is full of all of our videos from live events. We just posted quite a few interviews from our live coverage from CES over there. So stop on by and check that out. And of course, download the all-new Roku app, folks. That's right. Curious Realm now officially has our own Roku app, thanks to our good friends at Always Press Record for programming that for us. You can find all of the episodes on our Roku app. You can also find all of my meditation music. So if you're a targeted individual, things like that, binaural beats can be a fantastic solution for you. Stop on by, download that app, everybody. When we come back from this very, very quick break, we will be joined by our good friend, Keith Seland, author of the Humaniverse. We will be talking about petroglyph messages, what petroglyphs are, what the messages in them may mean, and whether or not we as humanity are even ready for the conversation with an extraterrestrial race, whether or not they would even consider us fodder for conversation. We will be getting into that and so much more with Keith Seland right after this, folks. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back from that commercial break. Thank you so much to all of our sponsors, especially True Hemp Science. Our good friend Christopher Lynch over there does an amazing job using an alchemical spagyric process, using the entire plant, seeds, stems, roots. Every part of the hemp plant is used to make his amazing CBD. It is the only CBD I have found nationwide that actively has a terpene profile Great stuff. Stop on by. Check them out, everybody. Curious Realm, or Curious 7 is the code that you want to use at truehempscience.com to get your 7% off your cart of $50 or more, as well as your two free edibles. Our guest in this segment, Keith Seland. He is the author of the Humaniverse series, the Humaniverse Guide. His website is thehumaniverse.org. He has written a complete series of books about the hows and whys of ET contact, whether or not we are worthy of the conversation. He has been out in the last year doing all kinds of petroglyph research across the United States, as well as across the globe. He recently made a trip to Egypt, as well as Göbekli Tepe, and we'll be getting into some of that this evening. Welcome back to the show, Keith Seland. How are you doing, my friend?
Great, Chris. How are you?
Doing okay.
Wishing you a very, very happy holiday. We got one more coming up, at least, anyways.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It's always fun going through the holiday season, seeing. Mainly because a lot of people release books at that time, release video series, stuff like that. So there's been a plethora of releases from many of our guests, things like that. And you recently went out and released a whole bunch of videos from Göbekli Tepe, things like that. How was your trip abroad? How did that go?
It was awesome, Chris. I was very fortunate to have an association with geologist Robert Schock and his wife Katie from Boston University. I was invited this year, a lot of frequent flyer miles, on excursions to both Egypt earlier in the year and Turkey later on in the summer. Again, the reason for being very fortunate is that as lifelong researchers, they know the ins and outs. It's not a touristy type of thing, which is not really to say anything bad against that for anybody. Any person, I highly recommend if they get a chance to do a trip like this, no matter what the platform or what the travel, do it. But I was very fortunate with the Schocks in itinerary planning and help along the way. Any questions and answers, guidance that they gave me in conducting and planning for my research. And we had a little bit of downtime too. So nice balloon ride in Cappadocia, and just awesome. The footsteps that we left in Anatolia there.
Too cool, man. Too cool. I mean, an experience of a lifetime, I'm sure, much less as a researcher where you get to actively go out and start using the tools of the trade, archaeo-astronomy, things like that, and start really finding alignments and similarities to sites that you've been to here in America and even in Egypt, things like that. Let's go ahead and start cracking that nut real quick. What things did you start finding in Egypt and there in Cappadocia that were similar to some of the petroglyph work that you've done here in the United States, Keith?
In both places, I think those are examples of other human ancestral civilizations in which in being able to start my studies on them. The study's by no way complete. I'm going to be taking future trips to both places also, and amongst other places in the world. But the study is, and again, to do with archaeoastronomy and basically the cultures of all of our worldwide civilizations. I'm developing the thesis that with the overall purpose of charting our future, and that being a future with other extraterrestrial intelligences, we have to start planning for it now on a proactive type of basis. And by doing that, as our species is very accomplished at doing. When we want to learn something, we study its past. Well, in this case, human beings, our ancestors from the ancients, Egypt, Turkey, and other civilizations, they are us. We are them, Chris. Our DNA is their DNA. I've had this confirmed by back at my university, a former professor who actually had left the school to work on the original genome project. He confirmed when I asked him the question, is it reasonable to assume that we can take our DNA or take DNA from our ancients and is it compatible? And he says most reasonably. So what that means is that we're them, they're us. They think or thought the same ways that we do today. A big part of it is being hardwired, our brain's evolution, the mind, and the developments, the anatomical developments there, but also their day-to-day, how will I put this? Their lives. Our ancients were very, very observant, way more so than. And so they learned their knowledge, and they had an intuitive knowledge and of the environment, the world, the cosmos, potentially interactions and experiences with other intelligences not from planet Earth. So all of that is left as the landscape and the potential for us to learn from to help develop our plan. A plan for basically our future. And I mean, it's to say also that let's say if a listener out there wants to put down the ET aspect of it, okay, so then the question, well, why would this research, why would this knowledge, why would this learning for you be advantageous for you? Putting down the ET version of it, our ancients, our ancestors were extremely holistic, and they had a very high intuitive development with harmony and balance of nature with their environments, their geography, and the planet. We, by today's antithesis, have kind of gone away from that holism and that harmony and that cosmic awareness. Yeah. And it's become a series of rabbit holes, both individually and all the groups that we're in. And it's starting to have physical effects on our planet. And on us. While you were talking, I literally brought up the article from Nature that came out in April about how trauma's effects can pass from generation to generation. Keith, we're talking about like even extinction events, things like that, that can be passed down epigenetically. Like the trauma and the experience of our ancestors is literally passed down to us through genetics. Like, that's wild. Yeah. That's crazy to think about. Hard wiring. And you know, it's a topic that we speak about regularly on this show, just how fast we as a society lose these connections. The example I use regularly, I'm Cajun. I am 50% Cajun. It is one of the only cultures aside from Native Americans that are native to this country. One of the only languages native to this country. Much like Native American languages were quashed down by churches, the government, things like that. When English speakers came in and took over the schools of Louisiana, they started putting kids in corners, making them wear dunce caps if they spoke the language of the ignorant, if they were speaking Cajun. One generation, Keith. One generation is all it took. You are hard-pressed to find somebody my mother's age who is fluent in Cajun. Both of my grandparents spoke it. It was their first language. One generation. That's all it takes to lose an entire culture. So it's not hard. It doesn't take millennia.
Okay, people, like these knowledges, even the idea, like you're saying, of of the ancients being connected to the earth in a different way. When our grandparents went to bed, Keith, there was no electric light. If you had a fat lamp or an oil lamp, maybe you stayed up and read a book or told stories or something like that. But dude, if you lived in the country, like when it was night, it was night. The only thing you had was your connection to the stars. And if you think that they didn't realize that, hey, it gets really cold this time of year when that star hits that point in the sky, like every year, watch out. Yeah, they were way more connected to that than we are. You ask most people to go out and spot the brightest, quote, star in the sky right now, they couldn't even tell you that it's Jupiter. Much less locate it. They can't even
see it.
Much less locate it. And it is like, it's dusk, there's Jupiter. Big, bright orange spot. Most people do not know it's a planet. Everybody who hunted, who planted, everybody knew what that was and what its rising meant. Everybody.
And for those of us today that I would at least say a simple majority that can't even physically see Jupiter because of the glow of the city that they live in. Look at any of NASA's satellite photos. There's a library of them now.
I'm giving you the applause button. Because, I said I'm giving you the applause button. Because, yes, absolutely. Like, I take pictures of the night sky. I do budget astrophotography in my backyard. But I live in the city. And people are like, wow, how do you get that picture of Orion's nebula? It's like, well, if you've got a lens that'll reach out there, you'd be surprised. But trying to see Orion, like, I can't see all of Orion. I can see parts of it. I know where in that formation of stars to point my camera. As long as I can see 3 of the main stars, I can pretty well nail it. But that's because I know my constellations. I know where they are. Even though I can only see a third of that constellation, you know? So yeah, we now have active efforts for dark sky communities to return things back to that point. Because otherwise, like our children will grow up. My kid, only way he knows all this is because I bring him out in the backyard and I show him with the telescope and go, ooh, look, there's Jupiter, you know?
How does he react to that?
He loves it. He loves it. He has his own small telescope that he brings out and looks at the moon with me, things like that. But it's something that it's a fascination I had and something that is utterly useful. If you know the night sky and when things rise, like you can find cardinal directions. You can find your way back home by the stars. We navigated across the oceans without compasses with the stars. You know, so if you know your star locations, you can find your way anywhere in the world. And that's just it. Like, we've lost that not only sense of wonder, Keith, but that sense of connection and that urgent sense of necessity of the knowledge.
Yeah. And I'll throw this out to say that in our culture today, the 140 character, 280 character Twitter world, or what is it called, X now, I guess.
Yes.
But that's just an example demonstration of again the rabbit holes that we have fallen into in society. But it's also more profoundly to say that our attention span, with the evolution of technology and the promulgation of it, has just eroded any course of us wanting to study or learning, amazement, or awe. I'll give you an example too. Now, I'm a member of the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. And over the last couple of years, they created, finished building a new platform called the GeoVale, where they have 8 telescopes on it.
Yep.
Now they always had they're very rich in their public outreach amongst observatory campuses. So there's other things to do there, but in the evening or whatever. The attention span of people, it's very, very limited and gets more limited. And another example on this GeoVale platform, they have I think it's 9 telescopes, which is cool. You know, the viewer gets to whatever's in the night sky to take a quick look at it or whatever. There is a system, you've probably heard of this. It's called Mallinckrodt. It's a company in Toronto, Canada, up kind of up my way a little bit, and they have Lowell has bought into systems. Yeah, the Godot, GeoVale, the Open Deck, and this Mallinckrodt system. It's a very affordable for an individual combination real-time photographic and telescope setup, to where especially on the Meet the Astronomer nights, they have a giant digital television screen set up, and the astronomer can type in one of the featured deep sky objects for the night, and through the process of stacking, as you well know, the Mallinckrodt can collect up in the course of a few seconds or a minute a whole hundreds or maybe even up to 1,000 or more photos, and the end point is a full color representation of that deep sky object. Now the ones that you would see in the magazines, you know, from years ago, this would have taken many hours to do, but our technology today has advanced to where, like I said, the individual member of the public can afford these things for their telescope. But my point was that with the immediacy and the attention span of an individual today being so eroded by the immersion into the technology, even by example at the Mallinckrodt at GeoVale, people are awed. That is always the most crowded. But then they look at it for a few seconds and then they say, okay, what's the next one? Yeah.
The wonder and awe fades so fast.
Chris, that's so representative.
It becomes so blasé, so quick. So, oh, wow, awesome. That's a nebula millions of miles away?
What's the next one?
That's all there is to it? Oh, okay. Like
that's it. It's and I mean our ancestors, again, there were so much, we have so much to learn from them. They were so much the opposite that like you said, they used the cosmos, the night sky, especially the sky in general, was the most important crop or learning tool or construct of their existence.
Yep. Yeah.
So they had to learn it.
Well, and it's the fact of multiple strata of most ancient societies learned it in a different way. You know, many of the mother figures, things like that, even medicine women, you know, learned them to pass the stories on, to pass along origin stories, things like that. You know, same thing with medicine men. Hunters use them to explain when to go out and hunt different animals in the night sky, that kind of stuff, because that's what you track the hunting and planting season with. So it wasn't like it was just the magi of a society who knew things about the stars. You know, like these were the panoply of stories that inhabited their everyday, everything from finding and gathering and planting food to where and when to go hunt animals, to when a sacrifice needs to be made so that the gods are appeased, Keith. All of these things were covered. And what's interesting is that all these same things are covered in petroglyph. They're covered in rock art. Many of the stories, things like that's the rock art that you see, where you see people hunting animals, that kind of stuff. But petroglyphs in specific are the ones that tell the historical part, the part of their history that is the fantastic, that they do not consider myth, things like that they consider actual reality and history according to their people. These are the deep-seated religious beliefs, gods that come and visit, things like that. So it really, understanding this differentiation of technology in the real world is utterly the root of understanding the difference between rock art and what's in a cave and petroglyphs that are out there at a sacred location. You know, both look very similar, but they're different things and they have different purposes and they communicate different things. So let's start getting into that real quick.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one of the couple of very most important ways of communication amongst ancient civilizations was by the glyph technique, recordings, and they didn't have sheets of paper. Well, they had papyrus, some of them did, but by the recordings on rock art. And again, I made them. I slipped. I called it art, and I rail against that because it's actually communication.
Absolutely.
But the verbal folklore story too, and that the folklore had a very very important purpose and causation to where that the form of communication was kept up for many, many thousands of years. And what I mean by that, Chris, is that as humankind developed from the upper Paleolithic into the Neolithic and more towards today, by those times, Homo sapiens sapien existed. They are us, we are them. We didn't have to go back hundreds of thousands of years ago. The modern anatomy was well established in Neanderthal times back 50, 60, 80,000 years ago. Our brain, our mind, the neocortex had already been developed. We had lost, how will I put this? We gained the potential for language by losing a body part, so to speak, the vestigial air sac. That is a product or of evolution, a link of any sort between the primates and human beings. And basically what that translates to is that you know that primates can do their screaming, and that's a form of communication that they use in their wild, their nature, so to speak. Our language capabilities were developed only when this vestigial air sac happened to have been naturally selected out, where there's a little bit of a remnant today, but it's nowhere near like what it used to be. So that allowed for language. But my point is that in the evolution of the human brain, so to speak, the development, the expansion of the neocortex, other neurological phenomenon and causations of what happened, that allowed us to develop the basis for the process of socialization, ritual, critical thinking, ritual development, to the point where, and again, this is another universal point amongst all of our ancient cultures, and to answer the question, they are us, we are them, this is another example of that, in that we think the same way that they did back then. Yep. The development, creation and development of rituals was a social bonding mechanism. All the ancient cultures, Native America, the Aborigines, Egyptians, Chinese, all Anatolia and Proto-Europe, they were all humans, Homo sapiens sapien. They all developed the processes of ritual thinking, and throwing into that and tying back to one of your points, Chris, the old adage, knowledge is power.
Mm.
Well, when the agricultural agrarian revolution happened and urbanization started to happen, it was a very big change in the culture, the human culture. Before that, the hunter-gatherers were egalitarians. But when they started to congregate more, and then those were populated by extended families only, and they cooperated with each other during great hunts and the acquisition of food and learning, again, from knowledge of the stars, astronomy, some planting and things like that. There was planting and cultivation going on. It wasn't a eureka moment from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, the revolution. Those were gradual processes, as was the urbanization of human cultures, and then from there the development of competition and power and the accessibility of trade. As cultivation and herding came into existence.
Yeah.
There was trade developed and whatnot. So the knowledge is power adage comes from some entrepreneurial types, type A, so to speak, that reasoned that the more knowledge they had, the more power. So then you develop into the mythology and the potential for development of religion, cosmic awareness, potentially the shamanistic aspects, the creation or the discovery of chemical stimulants for potentially some of that, but there also were some real life meetings with beings that were more advanced, intelligent, way more than the human natives were. So, and this is representative of all the cultures, Native America, and as a result, there are two forms of communication: the folklore and the recordings of petroglyphs, especially the folklore. That was a very big product of the socialization, the ritualization. That was part of the culture, as we do today. We join communities and perform ritual activities. And the same thinking process as back then.
This concept goes back way longer than, I mean, once again, these things are constantly being studied, restudied, refound, Keith. Just recently, I'll pop the article up right now. Just recently in SciTech Daily, it popped up. Not built by Homo sapiens. Scientists discover, quote, extraordinary 476,000-year-old wooden structure. So 500,000 years ago, these non-Homo sapiens were intelligent enough to get together and realize they needed to build this structure together. And that goes once again beyond, yes, you need some kind of vocalization. You need it. Yeah, I mean, sure, a vocal sac helps you grunt. Losing that helps you grunt with intention. And helps people understand what you mean. And grunt or not, Maslow's pyramid stays the same. The psychological need of breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep. These things do not change. They are only needed more in a primitive society than they are in a modern society where you have luxury, where you can take a nap in the middle of the day if you needed to. You took a 3-hour nap in the middle of the day as a Neanderthal man, you just missed half your hunting for the day. You know, you weren't taking a nap. There was no siesta time during that. The siesta doesn't like line up with, that lines up with like, you know, self-actualization, love and belonging, things like that. Like those are way higher up the pyramid than your basic needs. But even in a primitive society, you have the self-actualization, the creativity, the spontaneity, the acceptance, the meaning and inner potential. That's why you're able to build a building, and why you want to build a building is because you're trying to actualize something bigger than yourself. Like you said, following that, like immediately following to, hey, comes, okay, now who's in charge? And what do we collectively believe?
Yep.
That's the logical thing. Even by the pyramid, that's the logical thing.
Yeah, and I mean you can label that Homo sapien, Homo sapien sapien, and it would absolutely apply from our ancestors, again, tens or 100,000 years ago.
Half a million years ago, they were getting together and building these things. So, yeah, okay, the pyramid's 10,000 years old. All right, that ain't when it started. Like, we're talking almost a million years ago. We're talking like when platypus walked the earth, those kind of things. So, yeah.
And right, maybe tying in with a potential theory of ancient civilizations that existed millions of years ago, but due to natural processes are still buried and inaccessible to us. Whereas in the future, maybe the near future, we are going to discover even some more of those. As you just put up there right now, the wooden structure. Was that in Africa or a part of a Denisovan?
I believe it may have been Denisovan, if I'm not. Nope, Zambia.
Okay, Africa. Yep, yeah. Central Africa. Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
But I mean, once again, turning the clock back, that's not like hey, let's turn the clock back by a couple decades. Let's turn it back by a couple thousand years. That is like, let's turn the clock back by one giant leap for mankind. Like, that's turning the clock back like a lot, That's talking about organization as a society and intent and things like that way longer than what mainstream science has spoken about it before.
Yeah, and the most fantastic part is what's yet to be discovered for all of these things. I mean, as time goes on, I'm sure we're going to find more and more things about that. With our ancients, and again, this is the logical development, and probably we will face a similar path to progress in the future. When it came to the farther back in history, and the indigenous had to devote more of their day-to-day activities to the very basic structure of the Maslow pyramid, in that acquisition of food, and consequently, I think they didn't build permanent structures to where, well, they were nomadic, so food was the most important thing, food and water, and getting out of the bad elements of the weather and climate, and the potentials for there. So they had to spend more of their time with doing that. But as you can see too from archaeology finds, especially in the way of the toolkits, the weapons of hunting for our ancient cultures, as they developed, very slowly there developed an evolution to where the mind of our ancients began to, the critical thinking began to take hold to where they are slowly being able to, what's the word I want to use, to control their natural environment, control. They were able to develop better weapons to better hunt to produce more food. And as time went on, they were that found that they were then developing more and more control over their environment, which led to a point where the mind took over the development, creation of ritual activities, and maybe the development of the upper Paleolithic, Epipaleolithic, and the Neolithic eventually came into being. So it was probably the two most important words, I think, in discussions of this are control and power. As humans developed control over their environment, the power structure potential was then born. And as they grew and grew more control over their environment, well, you see it in the petroglyphs and the rock carvings and the folklore in the attributions. Well, I'll go back Tepe and actually I'll throw in cattle Hoyuk and Karahan and yes, with Native America and Aborigine. The development of religious icons, the realization that the female being depicted, especially in Gobekli and Catalhoyuk, with the bull, and in many other places in the Near East, the bull was a symbolic representation of the male of the species. But back in the Neolithic, the evolution of human thought in the mind to the point where rituals were created and eventually religion, and their growing control over their environment meant that they had more control and power. But still, there were still elements of existence that they didn't have power over, nor did they understand, such as the ending of the Ice Age, visits from ET and whatnot. And if you want to put up Sago Canyon there once again, or actually Horseshoe Canyon, the ghost panel and whatnot. Those are there's Sago there. So all the worldwide civilizations experienced the end of the Paleolithic with the melting, the end of the Ice Age and whatnot. So just to bring this kind of land this little explanation, the human mind developed and discovered that they were able to, as time went on, control their environment, control their source of food, sustenance, water, and existence enough to where less of their day-to-day hours needed to be devoted to obtaining food, cultivation, agricultural revolution, and herding and whatnot. They were able then to have more time to spend to develop permanent cultures, create a trade, create a mechanism for an abstract mechanism for money. The creation of money. All of those things, and none of them were eureka moments. They all were eventually very slowly developed, but it was because of the human mind that created all of these things. And until they were able to develop the technology to have printing and whatnot, it was folklore, and it was petroglyphs, and it was rock writing, and eventually cuneiform and papyrus, and on from there. So, and as I end this paragraph, so to speak, our future is going to be a continuation of that, because our thinking is the same way. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we, in our plans for the charting our future, which includes extraterrestrial intelligences, we have to look back on the path that our ancients took to develop as a sig aspect our future existence, so to speak. and develop the cosmic connections that we've lost.
Well, and we really have to be able to take a step back as a humanity, lose some of the hubris,
Yes.
of we are the pinnacle. I refuse to believe we're the pinnacle when we have technologies from ancient civilizations that we can't figure out. If we were the pinnacle, then we would have an ultimate means of storage and reading that would never ever change. Not like here's a 1 terabyte thumb drive with tons of knowledge from humanity. Hope I just threw it over my shoulder. Hope somebody knows how to read it in 1,000 years when they find it and dig it up. That's what we're up against as humanity right now, and how do we pass it on? How do we pass on the uncture of, yes, a return to the ancient, a return to understanding the world around us, understanding our direct relation to the world around us, and how that is, as every ancient culture understood it, a cycle. So many people had the opportunity in 2012, Keith, to understand and to truly understand what an ancient civilization thought and meant about apocalypse and the end of the world. So many people just took the term apocalypse and ran with it and said, end of the world. Mayans said the world's going to end. No. The Mayan calendar runs in cycles, great long cycles, like 10,000 year cycles.
Sacred geometry.
And quite literally what it said and what these cycles mean, the cycle of day, a cycle of night. A cycle of day is the burgeoning of a technology, be it even something like terra preta. We have Jared Murphy on all the time talking about terra preta. Dude, there is still soil in the Amazon that, not because it's in the Amazon, but because it was specifically geoengineered by the people that lived there. It's richer than the soil around it. It's a different color than the soil around it. It was specifically engineered to be so by the people that lived there. It's still better soil than what's around it. We are just now figuring this out. This is something that cultures in India used, cultures in Africa used, cultures in, like, terra preta is found all over the world. So what did we lose? What connection did we literally lose to the world around us that is just gone now? That for some reason we keep rediscovering our past and going, well, that's really cool. Look at that. We use manure and chemicals. They didn't. They didn't have to, and the soil's still good. It's not denatured soil like what we're dealing with in the wheat belt of America, where, we had a dust bowl at one point because people didn't know to rotate crops, and now we're up against demineralized soil all across the country because that's as smart as we are. We know how to not prevent a dust. We know how to not make a dust bowl now. That's a good thing. It's kind of ridiculous to think that we are the pinnacle when we are failing on so many fronts that they far outpaced us on. Far outpaced us when it came to
and
all of that.
I think technology is the key detriment here, in that when we invent something, we don't have the patience with which to learn how to most effectively use it. It's the immediacy and the impatience to rush on to the next invention. Maybe that's what's holding us back. Or my other thought here was to interject. I'll just say the almighty dollar sign.
Planned obsolescence.
Into all of that.
You make more money when things break and they have to be fixed. And that just goes straight to the The article I just popped up from nobody else than MIT News.
The concrete. Thank you. That
riddle
was my
solved.
next point.
Roman concrete. Like, we finally figured out how they made it. There are still Roman, and we have sewer systems all across the world that are reinforced by rebar. If those are not maintained, they will be eroded and destroyed within 50 years to 80 years. Done. Gone. Walls eroded away. Roman concrete aqueducts are still pushing water to fountains from the Alps. Like, still to this day, not eroded, not maintained.
I visited aqueducts, such aqueducts in Hierapolis in Turkey and in Haran.
Yeah.
For those of you religious, the birthplace of Abraham.
That's right.
From the Bible. Active, working water aqueduct systems.
100%. 100%. And that's just it. We are far, like the Pantheon in Rome. Like that thing isn't reinforced by rebar like what we would do an arched ceiling or a dome, a concrete dome. We'd be building an infrastructure of metal underneath it first. And then pouring concrete. Yep. Nope, they just made some wooden molds and poured concrete over it and took it down and went, there it is. And it still stands to this day. And
there's even some speculation. I forget the name of the scientist escapes me right now, but he had done some work a few years ago about Giza, some of the pyramids, substantial parts of the structure where they actually poured the stones, actually poured and molded.
Yep.
Created in that way. Maybe not E.T. moving them or something, but they were poured in place, so to speak. So. I wish I could remember the researcher's name, but that just goes back to our ancients had the intuition. They did have the source of trade, but they didn't have the concept of the dollar bill necessarily, so to speak. The barter system was still pretty a big player in those times and everything. So maybe that's the catalyst for why we have to build a new sports stadium every 20 years instead of building it the right way and letting it go.
Well, granted, if we built things the way that they did when they built the Colosseum, we would be building it with booty money. The Colosseum was built with money from the sacking of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Second Temple. So I guess technically that's, when you start tracing the money back, it might all, go to Raytheon. But yeah, Keith, I want to thank you for your time, man. It's always a great conversation. And this is one of the most important conversations to me. The idea of being able to trace ourselves back and being able to take a step back while we do that and gather our humanity again and realize how important that is as we move forward. I'm not against moving forward with technology, AI, everything else. We just cannot lose humanity as we do it. If we lose our humanity, that's when the aliens don't want to talk to us, man. When we are no longer the genuine species that we are supposed to be, that they want to have a conversation with, not all things, not all technology leads to enlightenment, folks. Sometimes you have to take 3 steps back from the technology to find that light and enlightenment. So, man.
Yeah. And it's not to say that in looking back and learning from our ancients that we have to go back to mud and brick and the out in the field ritualizations or things like that. No, not at all. It's the thought processes behind the intuition that seems to have been pretty much eroded, the common sense from our society. And I sincerely think, and I mean, there's some potential. There's some potential proof there. where ET is looking at us and thinks that we're not ready. In the famous Betty and Barney Hill case, in her conversations with the captain, he had told her that, and this came up in the hypnosis sessions, that she was told that we human beings are not ready to welcome the introduction of ET on a more of a mainstream type of a basis.
Yeah.
Our technology, and this is back in 1960, and there's other examples, Betty Andreasen and others, to where the messages they were told were that, your technology is run away. You don't know how to use it, and you should slow down on that. And, because of all those things, we don't really want to make the acknowledged global contact.
Yeah, we are
with you.
We are basically intergalactic chimpanzees with atom bombs, Keith. That's what we are to any far advanced civilization. And I'm not saying that we have to hit the point of the grays where we lose individuality so that we can just telepathically talk. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is we as a humanity are far from unified. Far from unified. Even in the idea of Ronald Reagan's speech of imagine how fast. I don't know if it'd be that fast, dude. I think if something landed right now on the UN lawn, there'd be a big protracted fight amongst nations before we ever got to the situation, man. And that's sad.
Yep.
That's sad.
And there was a very subtle learning moment in the old classic movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. If in the last scene, if you notice that there were representatives from all the major powers in the audience, when Klaatu was, they were getting ready to give their final message to Earthlings and to launch again. Yep.
Yeah.
We're a fractured civilization, and this is not to say either, Chris, that you want a one world government. No, that's not to say that.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want the homogenization. I'm too much of an American to want homogenization. Everybody who came over to America that was not a First Nations people, they came over here because they were tired of people being in their business. And they were crazy enough to go, if I have to take an 8-month journey across unknown waters to get away from you, I will. Watch me. And they did. So yeah, like you're full of nothing but crazy over here. But that doesn't mean that we aren't logical. That doesn't mean that we don't strive for more, that we don't want for more. And we have to be willing to put our own personal crazy aside to have that bigger conversation, Keith. That means
it's almost like
our religious crazies, our political crazy, everything.
Not create, but discover a central focus.
Yeah.
All of the socio-political nations, the 230, I think it's 6 at this point. It can change in a few weeks, but all of those socio-political nations, as recognizing that our species is the same, Homo sapiens sapien, that we have to find a unanimous common focus.
That's right.
With which to help chart our future. We're starting a little bit now technologically to be able to reach out and maybe purpose a little bit of an economic infrastructure in space, mining and resource development and acquisition, things like that.
It's coming. We should have a whole conversation about that soon. But yeah, it's wild, Keith. Once again, thank you always for your time. Anytime since I've met you that I've reached out, you have been right on the other side of the line, ready to pick up and have this awesome conversation. Let everybody know where they can go to follow you, to look out for the new book coming up, to follow your research, everything else, man.
Yeah, okay, Chris. Coming up for 2024, we've got the website rolled out a little bit. I've got a little bit of time now. We'll be able, Sherry and me, to add some things to it. I'm very active on YouTube and Facebook. I'm finishing up with the series on world government UFO disclosures.
Awesome.
And the 2024 conference schedule, I am definite, will be in Los Angeles for the Conscious Life Expo in February. In March at the UFO conference in San Francisco. That's
Great.
Still under development. We are working, my group is working on further scheduling later in the year, many different conferences. My friend and colleague Jennifer Stein is working with me to get me out to Arizona for a series of conferences at MUFON, Phoenix MUFON.
Awesome.
And the Sierra Vista conference in May. Contact in the Desert coming up at the end of May and June. And maybe, hopefully, the MUFON conference in July,
Absolutely.
Roswell in July. And we're going to try and finalize plans for a connection trek with Brian Forster down in South America, Peru, Bolivia, to continue my ancient civilization, ancient cultures research and study and discovery.
Well, fantastic, man. I'm glad to see you getting out there more and getting out in the field more with this. It is fantastic. I have loved your work and love following your work and our conversations outside of the show since meeting you. So once again, as always, thank you for the time and thank you for your wealth of knowledge and willingness to have this conversation, Keith.
That's my extreme hope, Chris, is to be able to give knowledge to my audiences and whatnot. Let's all learn together.
Exactly. And with that in mind, everybody, while you are online learning together and learning more about the Humaniverse and contacting Keith, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com/videos is where you can actively find all of the embedded video channels from YouTube of our guests, including Keith. You can also visit CuriousRealm.com/store. That's where you can find all of our guest books, videos. That's where you can find our merch as well. That CuriousRealm.com is also where you can go to like, follow, subscribe, share, comment, all that kind of good stuff. That's where you can watch us live on Tuesdays, also where you can find all the episodes. Thank you so much, everybody, as always, for tuning in. It is your open hearts, your open minds that make a conversation possible. And without conversation, humanity does not move forward. Remember, as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and stay curious. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Curious Realm. Stay tuned for more guests, forbidden topics, and hidden truths. Follow us on social media by searching Curious Realm. To download the official Curious Realm app and view the Knowledge Vault, or become a sponsor of Curious Realm, visit our website at CuriousRealm.com. Curious Realm is available on your favorite podcast and video services, as well as KPNL Radio, APR TV, and the Curious Realm app for Roku devices. Curious Realm is a proud member of the Ground Zero Media and Aftermath Media family of podcasts. For more great shows and members-only content, visit groundzeromedia.org and aftermathmedia.com today. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. And remember, the other side is always watching.